Welcome back to Lucore Automotive Services. Sometimes you work on a vehicle and it doesn't want to leave. My name's Richard. Welcome back. Today we're working on a Quigley diesel van again, because we did a bulletproof on it before where we put head gaskets, head studs, upgraded EGR cooler, oil cooler, put new H-pop in it, and some hoses and other things to get it ready for its next 17 years of life. And unfortunately, something happened. We're not sure what it is yet, but we're going to get into that. So, give a little recap on this truck. We had this thing in here a few weeks ago. Did a full bulletproof diesel.com setup, which is head gaskets, head studs, all new top end gaskets. We send the cylinder heads out, have hardened seats put in them, valve job, EGR cooler, oil cooler. We actually put an H-pop in it as well, and an IPR. Everything else looked pretty good. We did also put some hoses and other items on it while we were in there so that it'll be good for the next 17 years. Unfortunately, something happened. We drove this thing 100 miles for its test drive before we returned it to the customer. And now it's a few weeks later, and the customer called us up and he said, "Hey, my van left us stranded." And I'm like, "Well, what happened?" He's like, "Well, it cranks and it won't start." Okay. He's like, "I have it at a repair shop and they told me it needs an H-pop." I'm like, I find that hard to believe because we just put a brand new Ford Motorcraft H-pop in it. That being said, it's not only under warranty at my shop, it's also under warranty at a Ford dealership. So I ended up calling the mechanic shop where it was at, got some information, and I decided, after speaking with them, that I was going to go get the truck, bring it here so that I could do my due diligence, make sure that we didn't do anything incorrectly. And if it is a part that we installed that's bad, great, we'll replace it. It is what it is. Sometimes you get bad parts. So I drove down there. First thing I did was I hopped in the truck and I cranked it over. The first thing I'm looking for when I do this is oil pressure on the dash. Cranking it over, long crank, extended crank, like a 30-second crank or more, and I never saw oil pressure come up on my dash. That's a problem. Now, your H-pop is definitely not going to build pressure in this situation. Oil pressure is primary for engine lubrication. It's secondary for the H-pop. So if your engine oil gauge never comes up and shows it has oil pressure, your H-pop will never build pressure. So with that little bit of knowledge, we brought it back here, and Bruce is so interested to see what's wrong with it. He's working on it in the parking lot. He wouldn't even let me pull it into the bay. So what we're going to do first, because we're not seeing oil pressure, and it had excellent oil pressure when it was here before. And honestly, these 6-liter diesels really don't have oiling system problems unless something's getting picked up and either damages the oil pump or causes something to get stuck in the oil pressure regulator. With that said, we're going to pull the oil pressure regulator apart, see if there's a piece of something, piece of schmutz or a piece of dirt that caught the oil pressure regulator and hung it open. If that's what we find, after we put it back together, the truck will likely fire back up. But then we have to make a decision on what we want to do to make sure this problem doesn't happen again. If that's what caused our problem, we're going to have to figure out if there's something else in there that's going to do it again. So, we'll get to work on this thing, figure out why we have no oil pressure on our low side, and we'll find a solution to our problem, because that's what you do. So I had a hunch, because we weren't seeing engine oil pressure on our gauge, that maybe something caused an issue with our fuel pressure regulator. Now, the fuel pressure regulator regulates oil. If something gets stuck in it and holds it open, you're not going to have oil pressure. Crank, crank, crank. Oil pressure should come up on your dash. That was not happening when I picked this truck up. So Bruce came out, he popped the oil pressure regulator off, and when you take that off the front cover, he's like, when it came off, it had tons of pressure on it. I pulled it out, and he fished a magnet around in there, and he found this little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but there's this little sliver of metal. And that came out of the oil pressure regulator. So now that we've got our oil pressure regulator freed up, I'm going to crank this thing over and we're going to see if it fires up, if it builds low oil pressure. Because the high pressure oil pump, or HPOP, cannot work if the system does not have low engine oil pressure. Let's crank it over, see what happens. So, let's give her a crank. Cranking over a little slow. We'll let the starter cool down. We'll try it again with some jumpers on it from the wrecker. Alright, that's 550 hooked up with a little jumper. Let's see if we'll start. Charge his batteries up a little bit, we'll see if we can get this thing to build oil pressure. So I didn't like the way this thing was cranking over. It sounded like it was skipping, so I'm going to do a relative compression test, see what the computer tells me. Just to do our due diligence. When this vehicle did come into us, it was running, and we were just starting our first test drive, and the truck died on us during our test drive. So we weren't able to go through and do a bunch of these tests that we normally do when we start the process of diagnosing the truck. Well, when HPOP fails when you're driving it down the road, and it did have oil pressure at that point. It's kind of hard to run some of these tests. So we're going to do them now. Relative compression is good. We're probably going to find number 2 cylinder is damaged from the injector that was replaced before it came to us. Really nothing in what we did that we could have caused any damage to the piston. So I'm chalking this up to a pre-existing issue. When we had the heads off, there was no signs of any damage to the cylinder walls, no signs of any damage to the pistons. When it sits here running, now it actually sounds just like my other one. Earlier this morning it sounded like it had a slight knock to it. So it'll be interesting to see what we find. This one's showing cylinder 5 has a 4% drop from the others. Everything else is within 1% of 100%. So relative compression is good, which means our cylinder walls are good, our compression rings are good, our valves are good. But it's still got that skip in rotation, which is a little bit odd. I'm used to hearing them just spin smoothly without that dip and like that. Yes, I did buy a Ford IDS for working on these trucks. My snap-on scan tool does a good job, but this one, the actual Ford IDS has a few more things that make it really nice for testing. So we did some digging, and by digging I mean fishing. And what we found is not, it's really not good. So we had it running this morning, and we had fished a small piece of metal out of the oil pressure regulator. And I was like, man, it looks like a ring, but I don't know how a ring would get into the oil pan. So we decided to drain the oil, and we took a magnet, we fished a magnet up in through the drain plug and fished around. And we pulled out a whole bunch of chunks. And we pulled out a whole bunch of chunks of oil control ring. Now the cylinder walls on this, when we had it apart, all looked fine. We didn't see any cracks or damage on the pistons. So there wasn't anything saying, hey, you know, we got a major problem we need to deal with before it becomes a bigger problem. And we put 8 new injectors in it because with the mileage that was on the vehicle, it was warranted, and he had an injector failure before it came to us. So we need to do a little looking into the previous repair on the injector, because if that injector hydrolocked the cylinder or was over fueling, then it could have come up and bent the rod or cracked the piston, and I think that's what we're going to find out. When this thing was sitting there idling, it has a slight noise to it compared to my other 6-liter. I've got an 05 6-liter with 396,000 miles on it. I fired it up and I listened to it, and I'm like, man, it's got a little bit of a different noise to it. I wonder if we've got a problem internal. And the answer is yes. Yes, we do. That's a real kick in the face. That's not what you want to see. I've been working on these diesel trucks for more than 10 years. And this is the first time I've ever seen an oil control ring break into pieces and come out into the oil pan. I guess there's a first time for anything, but that's not what you want to, definitely not what you want to see. More than likely the bottom skirt on one of those pistons is broken, and that's why we're finding chunks of the rings in the oil pan, and the small ones are making their way in and through the sump that's inside of the oil pan. So now we get the joyous occasion to call this customer and say, hey, you know what, we get all of that van we just did a whole bunch of work to. Yeah, we need to pull the engine out and tear it completely down and then put it back together again. So not one of the better days in the shop. So I'm gonna go make a phone call, see if this customer wants to move forward. Unfortunately, it is what it is. Thanks for watching our bid on 6-liter diesels and H-pop systems. Thanks for watching.